Alex, how you doing there, my man?
Doing good, doing good. Yourself?
I am also good. Excited about this one for a bunch of reasons. I think Ark has been announced a while ago. Something Barack, I think, announced at BTC Plus Plus a while back, and now you guys are taking the torch. Was I wrong on that?
Yeah,
It seems like you.
I am not sure. I mean, I don't know if it was yeah, I think the paper, or at least like kind of like a draft. I don't know if you could call it a paper. I think a draft had been going around for some time. But yeah, this feels like ancient times almost. Yeah, I think the landscape has moved quite a bit since. So yeah, super excited. Also, a long time coming. Also to be on the pod with you. So looking forward to this chat.
Very excited. Um, yeah, we'll talk a lot about Ark, a lot about off-chain. You're kind of like one of the most vocal guys on Twitter about off-chain stuff, eCash, Ark. Little less on Lightning, but we can cover all these kind of in tandem. But real quick, I want to give a brief background because I'm a newer-ish Bitcoin, 2021 vintage. And when I look at you, it's like you're kind of a shit poster. You're kind of you're a technical mind, but not technical. So like, give me some color because everyone sees you on Twitter, but like, who the f is Alex? Give us just a brief overview of kind of like some of your journey.
Sure. I yeah got into Bitcoin around 2013, and just I think consumed a lot of the content, the few of the content that was available back then. And given that there was so few content, I was all about sort of like jumping onto Bitcoin talk and getting into the thick of the conversation after I kind of like managed to catch up on uh, yeah, most of the stuff that was available online. So Bitcoin talk and Reddit were really kind of like my stomping grounds. That was my way to obviously engage with Bitcoiners because certainly, I'm from Canada, small city. I mean, I'm from Quebec City, Canada. There's not a whole lot of Bitcoin action back then at the time. And yeah, obviously it got, uh, just fell into the rabbit hole as corny as this might sound. But eventually it led me to kind of like participate in some conversations around technical stuff. Mostly, I feel like I touched a little bit of the every basis of Bitcoin early on, trying to get into the economics of it and the political aspects. Um, but it was really so like the technical stuff that drove me to, I think, engage with the people in the space, and so that call it that eventually sort of like led me to become very active, yes, during the scaling debate, even very early on. And that led me to basically develop relationships with some of the developers that were active at the time, and even people from the original Blockstream team, like Greg or Adam as well. They were sort of like an outlet for me to be able to validate some of the intuitions that I have from technical perspective, and kind of like cover some of my blind spots when things were getting a little too much into engineering. And through those relationships with them eventually led me to kind of like meet them in person. I participated in the first Scaling Bitcoin conference in Montreal back in 2015, was it? And eventually, as the tensions ramped up for the whole block size war, I eventually joined Blockstream as sort of the person to interface with the community at large in the industry. They had a lot of people that were, they had a solid engineering team, but they didn't really have someone that was able to properly, or at least had not done the work to be able to properly communicate, distribute, and document what was happening in Bitcoin at the time. I think there's a lot of catching up that people had to do just in terms of understanding how far Bitcoin had come from, early Satoshi code base to, the state of the network back in 2014, 2015. And the amount of work that I had done and gone into just making sure that Bitcoin at 1 megabyte block was not breaking. you know, and this is some of the stuff that we take for granted back then, but you know, it was kind of like an educational phase for everyone, and even for me, really, to be able to go back in the archives and sort of dig up every single piece. And you know, I there's still some articles that I wrote from back then on like bitcoincore.org, which no one really uses anymore, but it's a website that was created at the time to sort of like dispel some concepts around Bitcoin scaling. So that was kind of like the first phase of my interaction with the industry. After Blockstream, once the block size debate concluded, I left the company and kind of like went on a bit of a sabbatical or whatever. I had moved to Asia just a little while before, and decided that I was going to move there permanently. Still stuck around. Never really did much of anything that was notable in the industry before, up until maybe when I joined. Literally fast forward to early last year, chatting with my boy Mark Goodwin, who used to be chief editor at Bitcoin Magazine. They needed someone to kind of like cover select the technical space and some of the things that were happening in around the industry. And I hadn't been wanting to kind of like get involved, perhaps a little more tighter, closer to the industry, and also find a way for me to start writing a little bit again, which is something that I had done quite a bit earlier on in like my career, and eventually, took a role as like the L2 person was the role at the time. It was a good experience. It was a very, I enjoyed my time there quite a bit. Honestly, I got to say, like, they get a lot of shit, but the Bitcoin Magazine team is just like all studs. I have nothing bad to say about them. And, they've been killing it the entire year. And I'm super excited about what they're going to do going forward. But obviously, I think just it's perhaps inevitable that me getting closer to people in the industry and having conversations with entrepreneurs and builders, I started getting the hitch of basically doing a little more than just covering the space, but getting actively involved. I thought like I was at a point where, well, if I found the right opportunity to really drive my energy behind a single project, and I think, it's one of those crunch time for Bitcoin as well, in a bit of the same way, but for different reasons than it was back in 2016, 2017 when I was at Blockstream, right? And one thing led to another. I met with Marco, the co-founder at Ark Labs, who I had known and followed for quite some years. And I was, I've been excited about Ark since ever since it was released last year, and so I think it was for me to see Marco and them kind of like really say, hey, like the important thing for me was like this whole conversation in around Twitter and the industry about like, designing for soft forks and all of that stuff. But in the meantime, really nothing gets done, right? I mean, I'm exaggerating, of course. There's quite a lot of people that have been building in the trenches and probably don't get appreciated for all that they do. But I saw Ark, and I still continue to see Ark, and I want to promote Ark as this sort of outlet for everyone that is eager to like bring new things to Bitcoin, for them to actually put things into action and start contributing to change. That is potentially, I really believe, is perhaps one of the key to unlock, the future phases of development that might involve, future soft forks and whatever.
Yep. Okay. Dope. Thank you for the cool trajectory that you've been on. And let's jump into the deep end. I will say one thing that's nice about you and Shinobi at Bitcoin Magazine was dope to see, because you guys are like very good minds. I think there's something about what I like about you is like when you post a mental illness tweet, it's funny, but it's also like you're calling out something in culture that like I should be tuned into, because part of Bitcoin is fucking stupid, and it's hard to suss out easy what is the dumb shit and what is something worth kind of like giving your ear to. So first of all, appreciate you for doing that. It's subtle, but like I tune into the frequency because I respect your opinion.
I mean, Bitcoin is counterculture, and I think people tend to forget that quite a bit. They have more so the sort of tendency to join the flock and become single-minded. I think one of the best approach that you can take with learning and sort of, just sticking around this industry is to have, strong opinions, but like kind of like loosely held. I'm the first one to change my opinion. Literally, I say this all the time, but one month I'll be extremely bullish on a project, and the next month I'll think it's a waste of time. And it's quite volatile, and I think I am being very hyperbolic at times about whatever is on my mind. But I like to kind of like shake trees a little bit, get people to bring attention to things that are being overlooked, or get people also to stop having sort of like this one-track mind.
Yep. Well, then, yeah, let's jump in on that topic of, people kind of putting things to the side. Side chains are a hot topic. L2s, whatever that means, is a hot topic. But off-chain scaling in kind of the Lightning fashion has been out of vogue for a little while. And you're probably the strongest proponent I've seen for bringing it back, whether it's eCash style or it's what Ark is doing too. So, like, before we jump into Ark and, like, dance around different specific topics, how do you see the current landscape of the kind of, like, triad that is Lightning, eCash, and Ark?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's been, for Lightning, it's been a huge year. And, I have been bearish at times and then bullish, again, about Lightning, this year. And I will say that the more I look at it, and obviously, at Ark Labs, we're starting to do some things around Lightning that I think will be very interesting and very beneficial for the network. But, preparing for this has kind of like led me to go back and have a kind of like a closer look at the Lightning ecosystem. And I have to say, it's incredible how vast and underlooked it is. People don't realize the infrastructure that's behind Lightning at the moment. It is pretty massive. And, we've been spending almost a decade now kind of like laying down those pipes. And certainly some people are going to argue that, well, some people are going to say that no one's using it. That's just blatantly false. I think there's a lot more action happening on Lightning than is sort of like perceivable. Because also we're looking at the metrics in the scoreboard, which is like the data that we have access to. But essentially, I think you got to realize that a lot of the activity happens in between private channel and Lightning as well. So it's hard to really like get a accurate picture of what's happening. But what we can see for sure is that the economic activity seem to, you look at certain metrics and it seems like they might have stalled. But I think what's happening is there's a lot more efficiency around the system. I think people who used to throw like liquidity around in Lightning in channels and whatnot that had no good reason to be there. And so it's easy to make the case that, well, the TVL or whatever you want to call it hasn't like climbed through the roof over the years. But you got to realize that the TVL is here at the moment. The value in Lightning channels that's here, at least the one that's advertised in public channels, is definitely, if it has stuck around all of those years, and if it's, there's no more sort of like, there's very little of the hobbyist type of people that are just throwing nodes up for nothing and just to be playing around. So a lot of that inefficiency is gone. And so what you're looking is, I think, a lot bigger, more professional players, institutions, and all of this infrastructure is now there to start potentially then think about how do we actually, because this is the one big lesson around Lightning that we're still kind of like jostling with, and I think we're starting to appreciate a little more is, okay, well, it's there. It's obviously just an essential piece of Bitcoin infrastructure, but how can we actually leverage it best? And there is certainly not this sort of like one-size-fits-all approach to using Lightning, which, used to be what was sold to people, right? It's all going to be Lightning Wallet, non-custodial, and whatever. We know that that's not the case. Obviously, there's custodial, but the Lightning is going to plug into all pieces of the Bitcoin economy and the Bitcoin financial system, and it's still finding its place. But I think it's like fading Lightning at this point is just completely ridiculous. So big year for Lightning, and I think if we truly get into hotter market next year, Lightning is going to really shine. And so as far as the other off-chain stuff, well, I mean, you could also make the argument that it's a year of eCash as well, at least just in the sense that it went from this sort of like curiosity to having captured a pretty significant amount of mind share in the last year. Obviously, there was just like the biggest eCash conference ever. I don't know, maybe the only eCash conference ever in Berlin last week, and people are starting to realize the power of eCash as sort of like this, this true cash equivalent on the internet, this sort of like string of text, this bearer asset that is able to be again plugged into all types of infrastructure around Bitcoin and around the internet. And when you're talking about like optimizing for sort of velocity and privacy, obviously, Lightning, I mean eCash, and I'm starting to see some very interesting thing. I actually had someone that tipped me just yesterday about some stuff that's happening where you're having people in Discord servers starting to kind of like send themselves Boardwalk, so like Boardwalk type eCash tip, the stable channel based, which is one of the things that I'm pretty excited about. So it's hard to juxtapose off-chain scaling solutions and payment focused scaling solution with the appetite that other people have for more fancy smart contracting platform and all of the DeFi stuff, and this entire like Bitcoin season 2 narrative, which has been to try and bring back a lot of the applications that have gone popular on other networks over to Bitcoin. And that's been an interesting journey, and to kind of have this renewed interest and energy around a lot of this stuff, I think has been extremely, extremely important, because you have people that are willing to use Bitcoin in perhaps more creative ways than they have before, and that's always necessarily going to lead somewhere, even if they fail their first attempt, or whatever it is that they choose to do is probably not in the most case the first time the right approach. I think it's just going in the right direction. And so one of the interesting I think from myself experimentation that people have been doing is, I think, through the derived from I think it really came out of like sort of like the ordinal action and people playing around with PSBTs and things like this. One thing that I think is pretty cool is this sort of new trend of trying to build like this on-chain, it's more kind of like this bridgeless implementation that are sort of like meta protocol based, where you don't attempt to necessarily create yet another copy of like an EVM sidechain. You see if there's a way for you to kind of like have people interact with those contracts, even if they're executed in a more trusted environment. Try to have people interact with those contracts directly on chain. I think that's so like an interesting twist that's been appearing over the last months, and obviously this is not something that can. This is not something that's going to scale, and so. But I think one of the promising thing and why I'm so pretty excited about Ark is, I think Ark brings a lot of the off-chain properties that we know and are familiar with because of Lightning, So like this unilateral exit and sort of this sort of like trust minimized features. I think Ark is potentially able to bring this security template over to use cases that have more expressive functions than payments. And, I'm not going to say that we have it all figured out. And I'm not even going to say that this is necessarily something on our end that we're going to focus on. But this is one of the reasons why we're pretty excited about Ark, is that it's open for everyone to kind of decide whatever it is that they're going to do with. And, we can talk about this some more, but, Ark has been, labeled as sort of like this layer 2 and promoted, even early on as a replacement for Lightning. But it is so different and in the way that it can serve different application and in the way that the whole thing is architectured, that it's going to lead, I think, to a lot more opportunity for experiment, which I think aligns with what a lot of people have clearly an appetite for. And so if we're able to allow people to build systems that are more secure, and perhaps more Bitcoin, perhaps more Bitcoin aligned through these new technologies, it's going to be very, very interesting. And I think people are going to realize that those come with potentially much better trade-off than, whatever side chains and bridge bring us. I feel like that's kind of like working. As far as I'm concerned, the reason why I'm sticking to those systems and insisting that people should focus on them rather than, the whole layer 2 parade of new protocol is that this feels like those things feel like working backwards. At the moment where it feels like a lot of people are just building models of systems that have been tried on other platforms and other networks and have not really shown anything for themselves, and in fact have pretty catastrophic. I mean, it's been kind of like a complete failure as far as I'm concerned in how those types of protocols have performed. And the result, like I think a lot of the unwanted result around fracturing of the network effect. But that's probably getting into too much details. But that's where I'm at as far as the tension between those two different types of architectures.
Interesting. No, that's helpful. It's also interesting because a lot of what's kind of like pushing this current narrative is looking at VC funding, and like I'm in that space, and a lot of VCs aren't really like traditional VCs in the sense that like they're not really being super risk on. They're kind of exploring territory that's been done over there, and they just kind of extrapolate to like, put ETH shit on Bitcoin, going to be bigger because of market, like whatever. They do some kind of basic calculation. So like more frontier tech is scarier for VCs nowadays. I think they've also been spoiled by tokens. That's another whole separate topic. Another thing I want to like double click on just for the audience is that you mentioned that it's hard to track Lightning's usage because it's so much off chain and private. And so the main metric people really focus on is like TVL locked on the network, like 5,000 BTC is on the network. Look how it's stagnating. It's not going anywhere. Lightning is dying. It's like, first of all, you don't see the transactions. So it could be massive AF and you would never know. That's one. Mm-hmm. And then two is what you mentioned about efficiency, which is that the network can get more efficient with capital. So I think this is part of why people are fading Lightning, is because of those two metrics go together of like, can't see transactions, so I can't track, 1 million blah, blah, blah in the past whatever, and TVL not going up, which are the two main drivers people track. So you don't have to comment on this. We'll jump straight into Ark. I just want people to deprogram their dumbass brain that like that's why off-chain is going to be so different, and Ark is going to fit in that same narrative, which is that it could likely be huge and you would never know unless they want to reveal some of those details. So
yeah, I mean, we gotta people like just to like close the loop on this. Like, I mean, I think people just need to stop looking at Lightning strictly like as a payment network. And I mean, a shift a shift to a settlement network. I mean, it can be used. Lightning can and will perform, and it will be very useful as payment infrastructure. But as a settlement network, and in the context of like, okay, well, looking at Bitcoin becoming increasingly recognized, and the price appreciating, and being increasingly more like it is. I think that the Lightspark people have been kind of like promoting this idea, that Bitcoin is the most liquid asset that is exchangeable and tradable 24/7 across the globe in every single countries. And the benefits that this creates in terms of creating inter-institution, a settlement network is vastly, vastly, vastly underrated. And I think I mentioned exactly this on Twitter a while ago, which is that it's very much likely that the product market fit and where Lightning starts eating a lot of share of the market, of a market, is in those types of applications, and payment, will kind of like come down later down the road.
Interesting. Okay, well then let's jump straight into Ark. And let's start high level. So like people have heard about it. It's this off-chain thing, but what is Ark?
Yes, the $1 million question. I mean, Ark is basically just a multi-party contract that allows a bunch of people to effectively condense a lot of their Bitcoin operation on-chain into single UTXOs. I've been playing around with the idea that Ark is basically like a chain of UTXOs. And in the same way that with Bitcoin, we put a bunch of transactions into block and we chain them together. In Ark, we actually put a bunch of transactions into UTXOs, and we do actually also chain them together through what is called connector outputs. But the gist of it is basically that, well, if we get 50 of us together and want to collaborate into making a Bitcoin transaction, normally what we'll have to do is that we'll have to create different outputs going to every one of us, right? Think of like a coin join or something like that. But what we can actually do through like the magic of Taproot and Musig is that we can collaborate to craft this single output where you will have then a Merkle tree, and the distribution of the Bitcoin is not going to happen through different on-chain output. It's going to happen within this single UTXO by enforcing how this single UTXO can be spent, so that we can say that, well, there's one UTXO on chain, but you can only spend it by sending, half a Bitcoin to Jacob, half a Bitcoin to Alex, half a Bitcoin to Alice, half a Bitcoin to Bob. And the way we do this is obviously we need to basically enforce that transaction on chain by crafting these conditions, these spending conditions, and having everyone sign them. So this is kind of like where covenants come in also, right? Because originally the proposition when Ark was announced was that, well, this is exactly what covenants do, right? They allow us to enforce different spending condition on a UTXO on chain, so that whenever someone goes and actually wants to spend it, they can only spend it according to kind of like the script that's there. And so obviously we don't have covenants, but there's a very sort of like simple way that we can basically achieve the same result, is that we have every single person that's involved in this transaction actually sign their spending tree. So we look at the list and we say, okay, this checks out. My name's is on there, but you also got to sign for everything that is in the tree. And then you put this transaction on chain. That transaction is coordinated by a server. The server is basically the one that is fronting the liquidity, because remember, we want to put a single output on chain. We don't want to split it into a bunch of outputs. That'd be extremely expensive. And so the server is the one that sort of batches all of these signatures and puts this output on chain. And we use the server as a way to be able to do atomic swaps between whoever wants to participate in the Ark. Basically, you don't have to be inside the Ark. You don't have to be. It's basically we use a server to be able to further then spend what we call those virtual UTXOs, right? So those fractions of the original UTXO that is on chain, we call them virtual UTXOs. And what we can do is that we can swap them to someone else into a new shared UTXO without having to trust the person that's paying for this UTXO on chain. So what we do is this happens through the magic of the connector output. The connector output is really the secret sauce of Ark. It really is, and people that are familiar with BitVM will also recognize connector output. It is actually fundamental also to the construct of BitVM. And connector output are actually pretty simple as long as you're kind of like a little bit familiar with transaction graphs on Bitcoin, or just like inputs and outputs. And the way it works is that if I have a virtual UTXO in Ark and I want to send it over to you, Jacob, I don't actually send you my virtual UTXO. What I do is I tell the operator, hey, the server, I'm going to forfeit my virtual UTXO to you if you can show me that you put a new transaction on chain that gives the equivalent to Jacob. And normally you think, well, you'll have to trust, you kind of like have to trust him to do that. But no, what connector output do is that you create this transaction. Again, those are all pre-signed Bitcoin transactions, right? And so you create this transaction where I'm going to forfeit my virtual UTXO to the operator, but I tell him, I want you to use as an input to this transaction a new output that you'll have created that is in the same transaction where you give the Bitcoins to Jacob. So by putting the new output on chain, by creating a new on-chain transaction that includes one spending condition that goes to Jacob, and also includes a single output with kind of like a dust amount of Bitcoin, we can use that new output on chain, plug it into the transaction where I give my Bitcoins to the operator, and basically enforce it through the transaction and say, you have to use this output as an input to our transaction. So if that transaction on chain doesn't exist, meaning if you never paid Jacob, the transaction where I give you the Bitcoin is never going to be confirmed. And so you get this atomicity between the two. And Ark basically, therefore, allowing all of these constructs really is a way to be able to scale Bitcoin horizontally, right? It's kind of like this, almost sort of like this UTXO rental service. You have someone that funds an on-chain output, and obviously Ark comes with certain fees to be able to hold this virtual UTXO and to be able to transfer it. But you have someone that puts on-chain output, and for a little fee, you're able to have your little room, your little apartment in this UTXO that you can do whatever it is. And most importantly, when I was talking about spending conditions, one of the important spending conditions is, of course, that if you want to get rid of the relationship that you have with the server, you want to unilaterally control this output, then you can just bring it on chain, pay some fees. Fees might be expensive, but we don't have to necessarily get into that there. But and in the same way that you do with Lightning, you're left with a fully on-chain UTXO. And so it can be used to scale payments, of course, which is originally what is kind of like pitched as. But we really believe, and I've become increasingly convinced lately, that you can use it to scale pretty much any Bitcoin application that requires more expressive scripting operation. So, we last week announced that we were going to integrate with Bolts, which is the sort of like non-custodial swap providers that are providing swaps currently between Bitcoin, Lightning, Bitcoin Liquid, and Liquid and Lightning. And what we're able to do there with Bolts is that we'll be able to provide submarine swaps, so non-custodial atomic swaps between Ark and Lightning. And that is done through virtual HTLCs. So HTLC is a construct that exists on Bitcoin already and is used in Lightning. And so why I bring this up is, again, so like every smart contract primitive that is able to be, enforced on Bitcoin, you can pretty much, I mean, there's some caveats there, but you can pretty much enforce the same type of constructs on Ark. So therefore, if you get very creative, and I think, we're going to find out that, I think we don't have quite an idea at the moment of what people are going to end up doing with this. But if you really think about it, anytime that you have sort of like a recurring service that moves a lot of Bitcoin around on chain or does a bunch of different operations, whether it's PSBTs, we can have virtual PSBTs on Ark. We can have virtual swaps. We can have virtual channels, literally. So the versatility of Ark is I think one of the most underappreciated aspect of it at the moment. There's been, obviously, as there always is in Bitcoin, a very, very strong focus on payments. But I think it's the tip of the iceberg for Ark. So I'm super excited to start exploring with the team and I think engage with other people in the industry to see how because this is again why I said Ark's been referred to as kind of like this layer 2, the scaling solution. I mean, it's debatable whether or not it's a layer 2. A lot of people like to think that it is because it has those unilateral properties. But I choose to see it in a different light because I believe that it's kind of like this. Again, I want to bring it down to a sort of like primitive, a tool, something in our toolkit that we can use to integrate with all parts of Bitcoin infrastructure. So I don't necessarily see it as kind of like this overlay thing because there's going to be different Ark servers, different Ark implementations doing all kinds of different things. And I think the novel part of this is, that, well, it's not a blockchain. We're not trying to scale with blockchains here. And so obviously there's some restrictions, but, who knows where we can get with that. I was telling about earlier, people doing, like the whole SlowFi trend where people are building meta protocols that you have like contracts being called through on-chain Bitcoin transaction and execution happen in a more, again, trusted environment. But what if you're able to actually do that on Ark? What if you're able to batch all of these operations on Ark so that, whatever it is that you do, it's not even a matter of like whether you end up spanning the chain. It's just a matter of, like everything that you're building, if you're serious about whatever it is that you're building, your intention is going to want to have this be robust against a high fee environment in Bitcoin. And, a lot of the things that are being built right now, that's not the case. And it's a question whether or not they're sustainable at all in sort of like the economics of it. But that's none of my concern, really. All I have to say is that whenever I think people are going to find out that Ark fits within their infrastructure, there's a place for it. And looking forward to find that out myself.
First of all, pause. We can let that breathe for a second. Now, everyone knows now that is what Ark is. Now, it's tricky to pin down. First of all, a couple things. The bolts announcement is super hype, and VHLC sounds super exciting. I also can kind of start to see what you mean by like being able to extend Bitcoin script in very interesting ways. That's very cool. I want to circle back for a second though, because my audience is middle curve to left curve. So, we're a little on the dumber side. And I understood most of what you said because I read the docs. I spent an hour understanding it. But like I want to give people some mental models and then pull apart some of this so that the normie can understand this. So for off-chain things, a good mental model is something like a bar tab, which is like you don't go settle on chain, or settling on chain is like paying your bar tab. You go and you pay what you're owed. In the interim, you can accrue the transactions, buying a beer, whatever, and that is kind of like locked in this ledger, this off-chain ledger, like a bar tab. Mm-hmm. With Ark, there's something like a digital bank, which is the Ark server, and it prints IOUs which representation of the money you're putting in. Um, and then you have this thing called you guys have it labeled as boarding the ark, which I like. And you can think of it as you're getting on the boat, and there's a two-way path to get on. One is you at an HTLC, which is a time lock. That's the unilateral exit you were talking about. So I can exit the boat whenever I want after a certain time period. The other spending path is you and the server agree to be a 2 of 2 multisig and spend that as you go. That's boarding the ark. And then when you're on the ark, you can kind of think of it like an ASP is something like a mini boat operator. So you're on their boat, even though there's like a bigger protocol. And then there's this idea of rounds, which we'll get into too. But rounds are kind of like you're boarding the next latest train or latest arc to keep everything kind of fresh. That's what I've kind of grokked from the docs. And I want to kind of like, don't push too hard on anything I said was wrong yet. But let's go back to the top. But I want to make sure that people understand this IOU digital bank thing. And let's ease into the boarding the arc piece, which is going from on-chain to off-chain and the two kind of like spending conditions. So break those down a little more in layman's terms so that people can understand those first two pieces.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're referring a little bit to, kind of like this check analogy where, you make a deposit and this deposit will lead to the server creating a new place for you, a new virtual UTXO for you in this shared output that is on chain, right? And so I think the one thing that needs to be clear here, and where I feel like there's the most confusion a lot of the time, is that this shared UTXO is not being rolled into a fresh one all the time, meaning that it's not a fixed set of participant into an arc where we all shared a single UTXO and we update it every round, right? That's not the case. It's just like you have, again, you have your check, you have your spending rights to this virtual UTXO that exists within the arc. And then, yes, you can do whatever it is that you want with it. You can use it to pay a Lightning invoice. You can use it to exchange it to someone else, send it to someone else. And this is where the rounds this is where you need to involve a round, because that person, once they receive your check, the way that we've built, and I think all implementations are working for, is that what you actually do is you co-sign the check with the bank or the server, the Ark operator, and you say, okay, let's sign so that Jacob can now actually spend this check. But this check is not truly yours until you actually settle it into a round, because me going to the server and saying, okay, we can sign so that Jacob can also spend it, does not remove the spending conditions where I can spend it. And so if the operator is malicious, I can say, okay, well, forget about Jacob. Here's this new transaction going to Alice. And if the operator is malicious, he can double sign this check. And therefore, Alice will be the next one to be able to spend it.
Can I pause there for a second? I want to make sure that going back to this bar analogy. In the bar analogy, there's the tab, which is like the amounts that are being tracked. The bartender is the server in this case. And what you're talking about right now is like me and you are at a side table, and I'm like, hey, I got the next round. And so we've kind of committed, but we haven't gone into the round, which is to go back to the bar tab and say, hey, bartender, hey, server, update this. Is it kind of the right analogy?
Well, not really. That's the thing. I don't think that the bar tab is the right analogy, because it more so is effective when talking about Lightning, and when you're talking about having this bidirectional sort of like balance, right? Where you choose to update your balance here and there. Here, you're really just talking about, just as you have on chain an output that can be spent in different ways. And this is where you were saying, I can take the check, this output, and I can just cash it in on chain to bring it to an output where I have, you bring it back to a single sig. When it's within the shared UTXO, it's kind of like a 2 of 2 with the operator, but with different spending conditions and time locks, right? And so no, what you do if you want to spend your virtual UTXO, like I said, is you have the concept of forfeiting that VTX that check. You say, okay, I want to. You're forfeiting the VTXO to the operator, and you say, I want you to. You say Jacob is going to come in, and he's going to kind of like cash it in for himself. So I just sign it over. I say Jacob can now spend this. But you need to go to the operator and say, okay, let's settle this transaction. And that is where the round comes, because what you need to do is you need to put your on-chain signature into this new output that goes on-chain. The money is never unilaterally yours until you are part of this covenant, basically, right? You need to be enforcing the spending conditions on the virtual UTXOs that you own, and you can only do that by putting your signature on it, and it needs to be your signature on chain, meaning you've signed the spending tree and you have your name there, and you're all good. And this is where again, it's not a covenant; it's just an N of N, literally like an N of N multisig that involves everyone that's participating, every other Jacob and whatever that comes around the same time at the bank and say, hey, I have this, I don't want to call it an IOU, but I have this co-signed check, I want to cash it in. So everyone comes in at 2 o'clock, and there's a round that happens. The operator is like, the other operator basically says, hey, I'm doing a settlement transaction. Everyone that wants to cash in, kind of like settle their check, registers their check, and we create a new output with a new tree. The person that wants to cash in their check, they check if they see if everything is all right, they sign it, and then boom, we put this transaction on chain, and now you have full control. And so, obviously, this requires your signature, and it requires for it to go on chain. But again, the benefits of it all is that rather than putting outputs for every signer and every participant on chain, you're just putting signatures on chain of every participant within the same UTXO. So this is where you get this is where you get everyone to be able to share a single output in a transaction, rather than split a transaction into a bunch of outputs and have them be on chain and have to pay the cost, right?
Got it.
I don't know if this got any more simple for your audience, but we'll
debatable
get through it. Yeah,
yeah, debatable. The thing that comes to mind, it's kind of like, it's very tricky because there's definitely multiple layers of abstraction kind of here, and like the mental models. But the signing piece, is it right to think of it something like, first of all, is it helpful to keep in a mental model that the server is kind of like a digital bank, or does that break a bunch of stuff?
I mean, you could call it a bank. I wouldn't necessarily call it a bank in the sense that it never really has custody of your funds unless you kind of let them expire. Now, I don't know if we need to go into like the whole expiry thing. If we touch on liquidity, we can talk about it. But you are essentially the server, and that. I mean, again, I want to keep this as simple as possible. So, yeah, you could absolutely call, you could call it a bank or a service provider. We kind of like prefer maybe to steer away from those terms because, they have certainly implications. Because in reality, you're talking about just a server. And what he does is he creates those templates, right? Those spending templates, which I'm talking about the Merkle tree, right? And so you have a Merkle tree that spends from an output and that creates a list of beneficiaries of this new UTXOs and how the money should be spent and go to them. And then you can even divorce those two functions. So you can have someone that creates this template, and you can have like almost like an open market of people that actually compete to offer their liquidity to be able to put this template on chain. So, you can have like, it's almost kind of like a Ethereum style, sort of like a proposer builder type of like concept, right? You have people that are building the transaction, the block templates. In our case, they're building the UTXO template, and then you have people that are putting them on chain by effectively lending their liquidity, because that liquidity they're gonna get it back eventually. When everyone has spent their money out of the tree, then the operator or the bank or the whatever you want to call it can then take that Bitcoin to fund like another Ark round. So, like I said, I don't know what the best mental model is. I've had a lot of good result with some people that are more familiar with other networks, effectively drawing the analogy to rollups. You have the server is basically like a sequencer, and he's taking all of these requests for basically swaps, and he's collecting them, and he's creating this again he's creating kind of like these spending conditions, and he kind of like regularly just puts them on chain, periodically puts them on chain, which involves creating a new UTXO. A lot of, again, some people, for some people that was kind of like the unlock. I don't know if that's going to be the case for your audience. But I think, the biggest hang up there is having people understand Merkle trees and this idea that you can, split we use output as a word, but you can just say like we split a single Bitcoin, and we say this Bitcoin can only be spent in such a way, and this way is a list of recipient. And by enforcing those actions, you make it so that you don't have to trust anyone. If you're part of that output, if you're part of that multi-sig that created this output on chain, you don't have to trust anyone. You know that your keys are there, and they can use these different paths to spend those Bitcoins. And then it becomes a question, okay, well, again, do you want to spend them collaboratively? And if you do spend them collaboratively through the other members, I wouldn't say even call them members, anyone that wants to join a new Ark transaction on chain, all you need is a server to coordinate all of that, and you get the benefits.
Okay. TBD if my audience will understand that. We'll check in the comments, but I think we can move on. The one interesting thing is that people, they don't understand Lightning in the sense of like almost no one's actually done like a channel open. They just kind of like get sats from someplace. So when it comes to boarding the Ark, when you're going into the protocol, in the docs you say you spin up an Ark address, funding address, and that has some spending conditions. But say a little bit about like the onboarding flow that people can roughly expect when this is live.
I mean, honestly, I think we should probably skip the exact mechanics of onboarding on chain, because that's going to confuse people even more. But the reason I say that also is that the ideal onboarding flow is that someone just sends you on chain, Ark BTC. Whereas, you don't have to have this process of bringing your Bitcoin. And this is, we actually expect a lot of Ark implementation and service and whatever is built on it to actually not even necessarily leave open the opportunity for people to bring, other than perhaps like infrastructure provider or service provider to bring their Bitcoins onto the Ark, because the UX is not necessarily the best. I think it really is not too bad, but I think we envision more so like a future where people are just, you can have sort of like I think something that we like to say is like Ark is kind of like a virtual account. So imagine you have a model where you have a Bitcoin broker's website that uses Ark and is therefore able to batch all of their withdrawal requests into those sort of nested virtual UTXOs. So what you end up happening is you kind of like have this relationship where you're never hitting directly the chain unless you want to get out of the Ark. And especially if you're DCAing, like if you're buying smaller amounts of Bitcoin where it never really makes sense to withdraw all of that on chain and create kind of like those small UTXOs, right? Because in high fee environments, it's going to be extremely expensive for you to spend them. Well, what you do is you accumulate virtual UTXOs, which are just as good as normal UTXOs in terms of your ability to, your sovereign control of those UTXOs. But what you might want to do is, you accumulate them. And okay, maybe when you want to go and move them to cold storage, then you batch them out of the Ark and you create a single UTXO that's much larger and is not going to create kind of like dust output issues in the future. And so we really anticipate people to onboard and kind of like start interacting with Ark by directly receiving Ark, Bitcoins from people, whether it is the place that they're buying Bitcoin from or other services.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. It's going to be very similar to how Lightning is used today, which is that you just happen to get Lightning sats, and it's a separate kind of balance. And when you need to, on the Ark, because of the way the protocol is written cryptographically, you can always go on chain, exit the Ark, get your on chain Bitcoin if you so please.
Or even like a simple swap, through bolts. We're gonna have bolts integration, so someone, could very much just swap their on-chain Bitcoin for Ark for like a virtual UTXO.
That's okay. Yeah, I'm actually it's still dawning on me how big of a partnership that's going to be, because most people haven't used bolts, but bolts is fantastic for going from Lightning to Bitcoin to LBTC currently, which is Liquid's Bitcoin. But they're going to become the provider for like swapping kind of like the most, what do you want to call it, non-custodial or self-sovereign versions of BTC as you bounce around. Bolts is the place.
I agree.
Okay, that's great.
Fantastic team, yeah.
Yeah, Killian and team are a beast. Okay, give us some color on ASPs. I think for most of my audience, they may have heard of LSPs on Lightning, which are people that are kind of like custodial services, make it easier to manage channel liquidity. Help us understand ASPs in this context.
Right. Well, I mean, I wouldn't say that LSPs are necessarily custodial, but certainly, yes, they are the infrastructure provider that are the people with Lightning are going to be familiar with. ASPs, I think the name sort of simply emerged from a lack of creativity, perhaps from people that were playing around with Ark in the beginning. Like I said, we're not quite sure that this is the most accurate name, because we envision a future where this concept becomes a little bit muddy, where you might have a bunch of different, just in the same way that you have like a single sequencer right now on rollups, and people are trying to do like the decentralized sequencer, like an open market for sequencing. I think something like that is very realistic for Ark as well, and probably actually even more realistic than it is realistic on rollups, where that's very unlikely to happen anyways. But I digress. ASPs, if you want to call them that, are the entities that are basically coordinating the operations, meaning that they, again, as I was explaining, they are processing requests for people to be exchanging their virtual UTXOs to someone else, and basically are the ones in charge of, effectively, they're almost kind of like the miners in a way, They take in transaction requests, and eventually they create new. Periodically they create new outputs on chain that batch all of those transactions, that sort of like settle all of those transactions, those internal transfers of the Ark. And I think the key point here is indeed that they are funding those outputs out of pocket, right? And so this will require some amount of liquidity that is going to be available to them. If you want to touch on this a little bit, obviously, this has kind of like been the main talking point around Ark, I think, ever since it's been proposed, is that you realize very quickly that, you have to fund the every output that goes on chain has to be representative of basically the volume of internal transfers that's been made in between this block. See, it practically is our blocks, right? But they're UTXOs. This UTXO and the last one. And so we're talking about pretty potentially consequential numbers, and this actually can get even worse than the actual amount of transfer volume, because you have to account for change also, which you're dealing with UTXO model, so you have to account for change. So the numbers can get pretty large, and again, the reason why I think this has been a concern for some people is that if you need a bunch of liquidity to fund a bunch of operation, but you're always able to kind of like cycle through your liquidity, it's not so much of a problem. The hang up has been that, the original pitch for Ark, the original design for Ark was around a payment solution that was native to mobile clients and retail user, meaning that you had to find a way to make it so that users wouldn't end up owning, those virtual UTXOs. They wouldn't end up owning like those checks that have an expiry date on it, and the check expires, the virtual UTXO expires, and then, the service provider or the operator is never going to run away with the funds, or at least it's very unlikely, because he's got a business to run, and he's ideally making money, and so. But you want to avoid this scenario. You're using Ark because you want to preserve non-custodial status of your coins, right? So you want to be able to make sure that your virtual UTXOs never expire. And what you do is you just refresh them, right? So you kind of like send them back to yourselves, right? Which is something, again, that I think is going to be abstracted in a pretty good way. But nevertheless, you have to do it. And the way that it was originally designed and proposed was, since we have to do this and we are targeting mobile users, we have to give them enough time to come back online, right? This liveness requirement where it's like, someone goes in vacation with his family and doesn't use their phone or their wallet, they have to be able to get back home the next week and not have their virtual UTXOs having expired on them. And so the original proposition was, okay, let's make it 4 weeks. 4 weeks seems like a decent amount of time where, if you're not going to be using Ark, your Ark payment wallet within the span of 4 weeks, then you probably shouldn't have money in there in the first place, because clearly you don't need to use that money to make payments, right? But that's the main issue, is like, okay, you're locking liquidity up. The ASP is locking liquidity up for 4 weeks. And there are different ways to mitigate that problem. You can shorten that time frame quite a bit depending on your use case. This is why I say, we don't have all of the answers to this. We think that liquidity in and of itself is a complete non-problem. We think that if there's needs for liquidity on the market, people will be happy to lend over their Bitcoin. Michael Saylor is going to be happy to give us a couple of his Bitcoins if it means that we're able to provide him like a quasi, very trust minimized, probably one of the, if you look on the risk curve, I think lending for Ark is right next to Lightning, or even better than Lightning in terms of security properties and the risk of loss. So we think that's a non-issue, but we know that there's a million ways to optimize for this. And again, it comes back to the conversation of like, I think people were sold the concept of Ark and a design of Ark that did one very specific thing. And therefore they have this framework in the head of like, well, this cannot possibly work because this and that. But, we're going to find out that people use it for a bunch of different things. And one of the ways that they can use it is, they can do transactions that are out of round, right? When we had this story of like, I want to send you over the money and I co-signed the check with the server, you don't have to go and settle it whenever you want, because if you trust the server to say that he's not going to double spend it, well, you can do the same, co-sign, go back to him and say, I want to send money to Alice. Can you co-sign that? We add another condition. We say like, hey, Alice can also now spend this check. So you create a chain, right, of, this virtual UTXO that exists. You create a chain of like spending conditions where as long as no one in the chain tries to cheat the last recipient, and obviously you need the server to participate in this double spending, well, everyone is good, and so you can absolutely just in the same way that Coinbase operates like their base rollup, Coinbase could operate like an Ark instance, right? They could operate their own Ark server, and therefore are you going to trust that Coinbase is not going to double spend transactions on you? Probably, do I personally want to have to trust Coinbase? I don't know, I mean, maybe not, but, I would trust like Bolts, I would be even more willing to trust Bolts or someone else, or, and so it becomes a matter of like, it's nice because it doesn't, the cool thing about it is, you don't try to enforce a specific trust model on people. You kind of like are able to leave it up to the user. And obviously an out of round transaction is going to be less expensive because you don't have to put it on chain. It's going to be less expensive than an in round transaction. And again, because it doesn't go in round, there's no liquidity, additional liquidity required from the operator. So liquidity, we see it a lot more as an opportunity. And it's a great problem to have. We're a lot more concerned about solving the demand problem, which is not the problem, but it's just like creating a sort of like an environment and an economy around Ark where we are able to make the case that Ark is good enough for a lot of use case. We think it is. And when we get to the point when we start needing a bunch of Bitcoin, man, that's going to be great news. And we got a lot of people, in our Rolodex that will be way more than happy to be able to, provide that liquidity at a fee.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I mean, as I'm thinking about it, the liquidity thing seems like it's a problem, but it's mostly a big nothing burger. One, because it's assuming there's demand, it's a pretty good way to get kind of like a yield effectively as being an ASP, which plenty of people are hungry for. It's like what Babylon's all about. So let's just do it in a better way using something like Ark. So that's interesting. We're going for like an hour 10. Let's do like 20 more minutes. So just some rapid fire questions ish.
Yep.
Because I want to cover a bunch of topics. One is how much do Ark and Lightning play together? Like, is there some cross compatibility? How much are they different? Because it seems like that's a big unlock, but
we think it's a massive unlock. I think like people don't realize how promising the idea of being able to rebalance your channel off chain without having to hit the chain, without having to make like a trust compromise where you need to trust like the Liquid Federation. Like that's a big deal, and this is going to, I think, severely improve the reliability of Lightning down the line, and even potentially the cost of Lightning. Because we're again in this like a period where nothing really is happening, and the fees are cheap. But remember that like in March and April, I have this tweet where I opened my Phoenix wallet, and it cost me like $150 to be able to add like 100,000 sats of liquidity, of inbound liquidity to my channel. So there are scenarios where right now Liquid is sorry, not Liquid, but Lightning is not very, is not an easy option for people that haven't had the opportunity to open all of their channels and whatever. People are always, well, open your channels when it's cheap, but what if I'm just learning about Bitcoin tomorrow? Obviously I don't have a channel, so what am I, like, shit out of luck because I didn't open channels before when the fees are cheap, and now it's 500 sats per VByte. So no, yeah, Liquid and Lightning and Ark, I think they have a very, very strong relationship. It's going to be again, we're excited about the Boltz relationship because of that, but we think people will continue to find ways, because it is really the first implementation of like what people have been playing around, like coin pools and Lightning factories, and it's one that's available today. So super excited about it, and even just for the simple fact that obviously you're going to need Lightning to be able to allow different Ark servers and interface and their users to be able to move money between each other, which just plays into the narrative of Lightning right now, which is kind of like this unique, very, very, very unique infrastructure. That Lightning is the only layer 2, in my opinion, and is the only layer 2 that'll ever happen, that'll ever exist, because it is the only one that has this global network where you have routing involved, you have messaging involved, that anyone can plug into. There's nothing like it. I mean, anything else that exists within silos, and it's a question of whether or not they're interoperable with Lightning and can use it to move money in around, like, to one another, basically.
Got it. Very hype. Okay, other topic is on opcodes, Opcat, Clark, these kind of things. Like, some people have talked about. So Clark is covenantless Ark, and then there's Ark with opcodes. It sounds like you guys have kind of inverted it to where Ark is what can exist today, and an opcode will make that better. But like, give us some color there.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, we have Ark today. It works. Again, I think it's just a consequence. I always go back to that, but one of the biggest detriment right now to having to reshape the understanding of people around Ark is, I think, the original pitch for it. If we would have said, if someone else would have created Ark and didn't mention covenants, I think we would be much further ahead in sort of like the conversation and the infrastructure around it, because the reaction around, oh, well, it needs a covenant, led 95% in the space to kind of like file it somewhere to the side, and we'll talk about it when we have covenants. Obviously, it improves. Covenants are going to pretty significantly improve Ark, especially when it requires a little more scale. And some of the quick reason why that is, like, when I told you need to sign that new transaction tree that contains one of your virtual UTXO. If you have 50, 100 people, you're starting to have this very large tree with different spending conditions. And without covenants, you need everyone that's in this tree, everyone that's involved in this transaction needs to sign kind of like almost every clauses of that contract, right? You need to check that, oh, this money is going to this. Almost every clauses of that contract, everyone needs to sign it. So there's a lot of interactivity involved there. There's a lot of information being passed around. And this creates a little bit of overhead and is going to impact the UX for mobile clients. But if we have covenants, then what you only need to care about your own clause. That like the rest of the script is enforced there, and it's embedded. The spending conditions are embedded within the covenant script, and all you need is one signature, pretty much. And so that's going to clearly improve the impact of, the user experience, specifically for mobile users. If you're running a server that interacts with Ark in some ways, you don't really care, right? If the process of like getting into a round and doing all this message passing and signature takes 10, 30, a minute, well, you have a live server. That's not a problem. It runs in the background. If you're trying to do this on your phone, you have to, I don't know if you've ever played with like DLCs or whatever and things like that. There's some like examples of this where like, and it's not because of poor engineering. It's just like the state of things is like, you have to kind of like to wait for like maybe up to like a minute for the thing to finalize. And it tells you like, don't close your phone because it's going to break, So there are things like that. And then the other part of that is basically like managing liquidity. There are some ways to even improve. So like the liquidity requirements for Ark just allow for more efficient management of liquidity for the operators. But the big unlock really, and I think what is, probably the most interesting thing, especially if we start getting powerful like introspection opcodes, opcat and things like this, is okay, what can we do to actually improve the worst case scenarios with Ark? The worst case scenario being like this, this thundering herd or like this mass exit problem that we have with Lightning as well, but on a larger scale with Ark, because then with Lightning it's two people in a UTXO basically, but and with Ark it's potentially a lot of people, and so what happens if everyone wants to get on chain? That's going to become expensive, and with covenants we can sort of like allow. With introspection, we can allow sort of like a lot more efficient where you reduce, because the way it works with Ark is like instead of Lightning, you don't put one transaction on chain to get your money back. Might have to put like 3, 4, 5 transactions on chain. So it kind of like racks up pretty quickly and can get expensive. And I think there are different ways for with covenants to reduce that cost, which it's just a matter of like, mitigating the worst case scenarios. Obviously, you want to kind of like build systems like Ark, systems like that, system like Lightning are a little bit optimistic in a way, right? You kind of like always hope that everyone is collaborative because it is within their financial incentive to be collaborative. But, some idiot might mess up, or, maybe some servers or a house burns down or whatever happens, and people have to go on chain, so you want to reduce the cost of that happening. And this is, I think, where covenants are going to help a lot.
Interesting. Okay. 2 more questions, then we'll close this out. One is the ever important question of when. When will people be able to play with this? What's the like rough ETA currently?
I mean, we're talking about like probably. I think we have a new release coming up which is kind of like a code release coming up in a couple of weeks. If you're in, I don't know when this is going to be out, but if you're in TabConf next week, you're going to be able to play with an on-chain mainnet Ark wallet. You're not going to be able to get your money out of it, but I think that's going to be fun. So I'm looking forward to that. And in terms of like our Ark node, which is the product that we're working towards delivering first, kind of like a go-to-market product, that's going to go into testing phase very, very soon with some of our partners and bolts and all of this. And so I think we'll have infrastructure people in the Lightning industry trying that out. And, I'm going to remain conservative, but I would say that it's very, very, very likely that we'll be able to ship the Ark node for the main public in like very early Q1 next year, if not before. But I'm going to try and sort of like temper the expectations here.
Under promise, over deliver kind of thing. I get it. Okay. Q1-ish. Very cool.
Before BitVM based protocols, that I can guarantee you.
Oh man, what? BitVM 5's loading currently. Real quick, I want to get your take on because one thing I think a thread line you've been pulling on has been interesting is that trust is good. It's not like the end all be all. Trustless systems are better for some things, but it sounds like you've evolved your thinking in there's a lot of value in brand and reputation and trust. These systems work, and you said something that was like it's simple, but it's actually pretty interesting, which is like I think you said something like more Bitcoin financial services.
Yeah, yeah.
in like a past tweet. So I'd love you to explore, like, just pull on that thread a little bit because it's very contrarian to like the Maxi ethos. And I think it's more true. It's more right. There's going to be this push and pull of both. But please wax poetic me a little bit before we close out.
Yeah, no, I think this is probably one of the biggest trend that I'm betting on. Maybe this cycle. I think actually like some of the first significant players of this are going to show up this cycle, but it's Bitcoin capital markets, Bitcoin native capital markets. And, it's kind of like a narrative that's existed and that's, it's been promoted by people trying to do it in a DeFi way, on smart contracting chains. But what I'm seeing is more serious players trending toward implementing this Bitcoin native financial system in sort of more conservative, with a more conservative approach of not necessarily getting, intertwined with all of this technology, but more so building sort of solid system based on very concrete primitives that allow, trusted relationships to be made more efficient through the use of technology that we have, in a way that's maybe more like peer-to-peer, that doesn't. And a good example of that, and it's you've had it on the pod, and it's my buddy Shazan and what he's building at Lava, right? Where you don't need an Aave lending protocol to build like an institutional grade lending, Bitcoin back lending service. You need, a DLC primitive. You need a solid infrastructure that you spend, more than a year in the case of Shazam of kind of like grinding to make sure that like there's no ways that anything of that can go wrong. And you can almost kind of like prove this, it's just like airtight in terms of the infrastructure. And then you on board a bunch of people that will be able to, in this case, serve those requests for loans. And those people are getting matched through a centralized infrastructure, but the execution of the contracts goes on chain. And I mean, this is a very efficient way to do it. It's a way that is based on, real world trust relationship. Obviously, like the liquidity provider that Lava is dealing with, they've vetted them. They know that they're people that they can trust to execute if there's high demands of loans and liquidity and all of that. And they have the infrastructure. They're serious people. You don't let you have systems like Aave where it's basically, well, okay, I can provide liquidity for loans, or I can take a loan, and then you get kind of like thrown into kind of like this environment where the person next to you, the person next to you is taking on this crazy risky loan, or this lender that's in the same sort of like ecosystem as you is making this outrageously risky loan to someone else. And, you introduce like system risk because you don't know who you're dealing with. So I think Bitcoin capital markets are going to emerge from a place of, we have tried and true processes that have evolved through hundreds of years of finance. And we're not going to throw this out of the window because we have access to technology and protocols. We're going to plug in the protocol for money, which is Bitcoin, and we're going to plug in specific contracts that are dumb simple, but that can help just kind of, bring the execution of these trusted relationship to a higher level where you can actually, you can, first off, you can commoditize those services, right? So you can open them up to a bunch of different players, and therefore you just generally incentivize better products, better services, better prices for consumers. And, another one I'm super excited about is the people at Roxxon. These guys are effectively building, it's one part of their massive plan, but they're building a Bitcoin denominated stock market where anyone in the world is going to be able to essentially go and have access to traditional financial markets via their Bitcoins. And, the midwit is going to say, oh, why do I need that? I don't want to like buy stocks. I don't want to buy Apple. I've got Bitcoin. It's the best asset on earth. But the intelligent capitalist is going to be like, wait a minute, you're telling me that I can short Apple or the S&P 500 with my Bitcoins? And all of that is going to be natively Bitcoin denominated options and derivatives and all of that. People have this confusion that, people with a lot of Bitcoin are plenty happy sitting on them and just watching. No, they actually want just more Bitcoin. They're always after more Bitcoin. And I think, there's different segments of the market where you can see it. Like, in like the Bitcoin season 2, you can see it when I was in Asia. People have different risk profiles, and you've got whales who are going to be plenty happy tossing hundreds, thousands of Bitcoins into whatever DeFi protocol, because that's just the way they operate. But when you're talking about like, I don't want to be one to cheer for BlackRock and whatever, but these people exist and they are institutional player that own Bitcoin, but they're never going to start fucking yeeting like millions of dollars into like obscure DeFi protocol, right? They're looking for yield on their Bitcoin, and they want to have they don't care. They don't want 10%, 50% APY, right? They want like 3%, 5%, because they're dealing with large amounts of money anyways, and they want to do that in ways that are secure. I think the opportunity for that to happen through, a Bitcoin native, Bitcoin denominated stock market is pretty amazing. Through lending, lending platforms like Shazam. I think this is the big unlock. And obviously, you don't want all of that to happen strictly. You don't want the financialization in the way that, people are talking about the ETF and all of that. The exciting thing is this can happen anywhere in the world. And it's all you need is liquidity and technology to make it happen. You don't need the same type of banking infrastructure, permits, licenses, whatever, that banking and finance usually deals with. So I think this is going to accelerate. And yeah, when I say that we need more, because this is all going to be to the benefit of every single Bitcoiner, is that we need more Bitcoin capitalists, people that are willing to deploy their capital into the Bitcoin economy one of the things that the Roxham guys are thinking about is, well, okay, what if we get to a point where we can have people IPO into companies with Bitcoin, right? Build Bitcoin native companies that have Bitcoin denominated IPOs. I don't know how all of this is going to work, but sounds very, very exciting to me. I want to have this. We need people that have been sitting on, hundreds of millions of dollars in Bitcoin to start deploying that. And, my hope is that this does not just mean, starting to mint a bunch of runes and ordinals collection. Like, I think there's a, higher goal here. And I think there are people that are a little more serious than that. And I'm seeing that happen. I mean, I've gotten to meet a lot of very interesting profiles over the last year. And I'm seeing don't call them the ancient Chinese whales, but there are ancient whales that are starting to becoming a lot more active, and that's to the benefit of everyone. So, and yeah, trust, reputation. We didn't even get into Nostr in this conversation. That's going to be a big part of it. Bitcoin is going to lead to a much more trusted future for society than we've ever had. I am more confident in that than ever. This idea that we do not and cannot trust anyone is just a reflection of the fiat system we live in.
Yep. It's a very interesting take, but yeah, I think I agree with you. It's going to be, that sounds very right, which is interesting because I think a subset of Bitcoiners are going to hoot and holler all the way down while that's working extremely well, and that's just kind of like, it is what it is. It's just hard to synthesize where the signal is in Twitter, but that's just the nature of social media, I guess.
Absolutely.
Cool. Well, I think we covered a lot. It was a fantastic episode. Thank you for your time. I won't make you show all the things. I'll have all the links down below. People go hit the description. Uh, but yeah, thanks, Alex. It's been fantastic. Really. We'll do a round 2 in a year when Ark is taking over the world. Thank you for listening this far into the episode. If you found it enjoyable, please do like, subscribe on whatever platform that you're listening on. YouTube does me a huge favor to like and subscribe. Find me on Twitter at Jake Blockchain. Show me some love. I reply to every DM. And if you are a Bitcoin builder that is kind of at the forefront of building new use cases, whether it's L1, Lightning, Stacks, Rootstock, Rollups, Ordinals, BRC20, I want to talk to you. So when I'm not doing this podcast, I am the sourcing partner at the Bitcoin Frontier Fund, where we invest in Bitcoin startups at the earliest stages, give you access to whatever you need, whether it's legal, product, fundraising help, as well as capital. So love to talk to you. You can hit me up. Again, find me on Twitter at Jake Blockchain and shoot me a DM. I'll read everything. Love to talk to you guys. All right, peace.
It's gone up. We playing the long game to the black rock chains with the rocks paid off from the blockchain. Going up high octane, so we up in here like pomade. Making big noise, big money, go play with your kid toys. You funny, I'm counting my Bitcoin. We up and we been gone. It's gone. Planned it out and we did this purposefully. Panning out like the kitchen currently. It's like surgery, way it's earning me a nurse's salary for cryptocurrency. I'm on a vacay drinking coconuts while wearing polka dots. This ain't no hocus pocus, listen up and learn. It's gone up.